We're living in a world basically where we are offended by people, and we too will offend people. Why? Because we have different minds, different backgrounds, different beliefs, and chances are we are going to encounter offense. So we will have an opportunity to forgive people, and we will also have the opportunity where we ourselves need to be forgiven. Forgiveness is a very important subject, because if we choose not to forgive, it is sin and it can take us to hell. But first, what is forgiveness? Forgiveness is basically the act of pardoning an offender. It literally means to let go, and it's a conscious decision where we deliberately choose to release ourselves of any negative feelings or resentment. It's a letting go process, right? Forgiveness does not necessarily mean forgetting, or it does not necessarily mean that we condone the offenses, but it simply means that we pardon it. I want to talk about three main points before I get to the ultimate test about Jesus handled forgiveness, or how did he say we should deal with situations like these. Well, for one, Jesus said in the book of the Gospels that if your brother have aught against you, he said you must find him, leave your gift at the altar and find him. Now, in our world, that is not what we're used to, because we're used to it like this. If somebody offends us, we will say, listen, they need to find us and to make it right. But here we have Jesus saying, can you imagine? Somebody does you wrong, and Jesus is putting the responsibility on you. He's saying, go and find him. Leave your gift at the altar. That's an act of humility, and that also shows us the great importance and responsibilities that we have on ourselves to ensure that we truly forgive, right? So that's one way. That's one thing that we have to do. And where forgiveness is concerned, we have to understand that forgiveness is for us. It releases us, right? It is for the person as well, but it's mainly for us. We are all offenders, and Jesus tells us in the book of Matthew that in order to forgive, we have to forgive. Because like I said, we are all offenders. We do not only encounter offense, but we too, we will offend people. We offend people when we think it not, in our words, in our deeds, even in our actions, right? We offend people when we think it not. So just as how we need people to forgive us, they too will need, or just as how we need for people, just like how we need to forgive people, we too will come to a place in our life where we need their forgiveness likewise. And that's a principle. God says forgive in order to be forgiven. So if we do not forgive, then we will not be forgiven by our Father, right? Now, the last way in which Jesus told us to deal with it that I'll talk about, and there are several stories right throughout the Gospels, several examples where Jesus teaches us how we can deal with forgiveness. But this last thing I'll talk about is, he said that we are to love our enemies, love and hate not. He says, bless and curse not. So do you know what this means? This means that if somebody have said something wrong about you, if people have been falsely accusing you or persecuting you or slandering you, we have the responsibility not to do what they are doing, but we are to bless them in return. And Jesus also said in the book of the Gospels that we are to pray for those who use us and to despitefully use us and persecute us. Now, some of us, we may say that, well, I can do that. I can forgive. I can pray for those who have done me wrong. But of a fact, when you pray for somebody, does that really say that you have forgiven? The ultimate test is here. When you pray and ask God to bless those who have done you wrong, if God should begin to then bless them, how will you feel concerning that? That is where it really is. If, for instance, somebody told a lie on you and caused you to lose your job, and you prayed for them and you asked God to bless them, and God begins to bless them and elevate them and promote them, how would that make you feel? In your response, in that lies the condition, the true state and condition of your heart. That in itself will reveal whether or not you have truly forgiven. Because the truth is, silently, deep inside, we may not say anything, but when people have offended us, hurt us, and do us wrong, deep down inside, we're silently watching to see God judge them. We're silently watching to see them suffer to some degree for the harshness or the brutality of what they have put us through. But that is not necessarily the case in which God all the time deals with things, right? So when we really forgive, it is when we can pray and bless. And when we bless people, we can really have a fact mean it, where when we see God blessing them, our heart remains pure. In that lies the ultimate test of forgiveness. Now, before I go, I just want to say one thing with you, and that's the dangers of unforgiveness, because we talk about forgiveness, the ultimate test, and there are dangers when we choose not to forgive, right? I just mentioned 4, and I'll just speak on 1. Number 1, as I said earlier, it's a principle. God himself, he says, forgive in order to be forgiven. We know that we've all sinned in words, deeds, and thought. We're all not independent of God's forgiveness. We all need God's forgiveness. At some point in our life, we're going to need forgiveness from God, and not just forgiveness from God, but forgiveness from others, right? And before we can be forgiven, we have to follow the principle which Jesus has set out for us, which is to first forgive. That's number 1. Number 2, unforgiveness can block our blessings. It damages our relationship with God, as the scripture says that if you have iniquities in your heart, God will not hear you. Unforgiveness is sin. It blocks your blessing. It stands between you and God. Number 3, it also has a negative effect or impact on our bodies physically. Unforgiveness, yes. It has a damaging effect or impact on our bodies physically. What do I mean by that? I've heard stories or cases where persons, they have found it difficult to forgive persons, and they end up sick to the point where they have heart condition, and the moment they choose to let go and to forgive whoever have offended them, the condition supernaturally cleared up, right? That's because of unforgiveness. And number 4 is the psychological damages that can be associated with it, because do you know that doctors are now proving that 80% of sicknesses are psychologically caused? It's psychologically induced by stress, because how our bodies were created, our bodies were wired to handle positive emotions, so to speak, right? And neural studies are now proving that just the same, right? For happy emotions, for happiness, there is a chemical that matches it. For joy, there is a chemical in your body that can matches it. But what doctors are now proving or finding is that whenever we have negative emotions, there is no chemical at all to match it. So our bodies begin to act haywire. And as a result, that's produced that stress. Now, have you ever observed that whenever you feel stress, what happens? You begin to feel pain and aches. That's because our bodies was not designed to handle stress. So what we're doing in essence, when we're harboring unforgiveness, is we're causing ourselves to become sick. We can literally sick ourselves. There are persons as well whom I've known. They've been to the doctors, can't find anything wrong with them, but yet still they're sick. They're complaining because of what is happening to them. It is because of unforgiveness. Unforgiveness is very damaging to our bodies physically. And unforgiveness is just one of the issues, because as we say, unforgiveness is sin. So this does not only work with unforgiveness, but sin in general. But anyway, today what we were talking about is the ultimate test of forgiveness. And what's the ultimate test? We went through some pointers. The ultimate test was basically pray for your enemies. That's where it begins. Pray for those who persecute you, despitefully use you. Bless and curse not. Love and do not hate. But when you pray, do you really believe what you ask God for? When you ask God to bless them, do you really want to see God blessing those who have done you wrong? There lies your answer to the ultimate test of forgiveness. Because of a fact, if you can come to the place where even though people have done you wrong, you pray for them, and when God begins to bless them, you're genuinely happy for them, then you're in a good place. Listen, we all have been through things, and it's a process and a journey which all of us have to walk. We all have to practice forgiveness at some point in our life. But just remember, forgiveness is not just for the person, it is for us. Because when we choose not to forgive, we're damaging our bodies physically. We're damaging our relationship with God. We're blocking the flow of God's blessings in our lives. We're hurting nobody but ourselves. And more so, if we want to be forgiven, we must first forgive.